don't know how powerful your voice is. They don't want to hear another legislator. They don't want to hear somebody else that's advocating. Sometimes they just want to hear that personal story.
Prevention is done with regard to asbestos by stopping all use.
Very tiny doses of asbestos can cause malignant mesothelioma.
The only way to stop asbestos-related cancers is to ban it.
About 70 other countries have asbestos bans. The U.S. still doesn't.
This isn't right. Don't let this happen to other families. It can be prevented.
About 40,000 Americans die every year of asbestos-caused diseases.
Good morning and welcome to our 19th annual Asbestos Awareness and Prevention Conference. This is our 20th anniversary of the organization, and we have a very robust agenda for you all. I know you're going to enjoy it and learn some new things. And at this point, I would like to introduce Perry Browder with Simmons Hanley Conroy, and he is going to do a welcome message to you all. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This was a nice personal touch that we did actually get to introduce ourselves and get acquainted. But what's amazing is what ADAO has done over the last 20 years. They're bringing physicians, families, lawyers, activists, and people that want to make a difference together. And that voice is being heard not only locally, but in the United States and throughout the world. So all of your volunteer time that you're putting in here and the support that you give ADAO is having a huge impact. Be proud of that. It keeps the memories of our loved ones that have been lost alive, but also helps fight for those for the future. And as we go forward, be confident to know that everything you're doing is truly making a difference. So we're all looking forward to working together today, getting acquainted, and supporting Linda and ADAO. Thank you for all that you do.
So we're delighted to welcome you all to our 20th anniversary of the Asbestos Disease Awareness Prevention Conference. So it is important to take a look at what we have been doing and where we are going. In your program, it's 128 great pages with tributes, stories, policy, and of course, bios about our speakers. When ADAO started, when Doug and I first met in Washington, we really didn't have a path of where we would be going. We never envisioned 20 years later we'd be doing this work, but we always knew that with education, advocacy, and community, we could make change happen. So if anybody wants to get social other than Chris, please, by all means, hashtag us, 2024 ADAO. And Marilyn did show this picture. It's quite a treasure to us to have known that we gathered in 2005 and we're still doing what I think is great work going forward. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my dear friend and partner, Doug Larkin, who I met with Emily at a Senator Murray band briefing. And Doug's father-in-law had been diagnosed with mesothelioma. In 2017, Doug sadly passed away from ALS. But his work continues and families continue to unite. Jordan was going to be here to perform. He is our national spokesperson. He is like way great, but he has an injury, so he won't be here, but we always like to let Jordan know that his voice does matter. And of course, the honorees, it is a great joy to recognize those leaders within our community that do exceptional work. Pat Morrison, you'll hear from later on. We have a video from Representative Don Bacon. It's big. He's the first Republican to co-sponsor our ban. Less Cancer does great work about trying to prevent and reduce cancer. Tribute of Inspiration Award will go to the Plaintiffs Asbestos Litigation Seminar. Many people may not have heard of PALS, but they bring together plaintiffs' lawyers and they learn, they exchange ideas and techniques and new data, and they are absolutely amazing. And if you can't win in Capitol Hill, you better have some good lawyers to work in tandem to get the job done. Andy Alberta is going to join you by way of video, and of course the Duran family and Patrick Morrison will receive Allen's Award. We couldn't do this alone. We want to thank our platinum sponsor, Simmons Hanley Conroy, and of course the Gorey Law Firm, Motley Rice, and Early, Lucarelli, Sweeney, and Meisenkoten for their generosity to allow us to do our work. And we do not represent any law firms. We're independent, and we're grateful to our sponsors to allow us to remain independent. Leadership matters. Leadership matters with ADAO, and it's a tribute to the work that we do to have people like Dr. Arthur Frank and Dr. Lemon and so many others. And you can see that we've come together and our leadership is strong. And I want to thank Kimberly, Ellen, who are here today. And of course, our Science Advisory Board, when we do write certain briefs or docket submissions, we do pass them through and get advice from our leadership. You can see some amazing individuals, obviously, Brad Black, Barry Castleman, Raja Flores, Michael Harbert, Stephen Markowitz, Jackie Moline, Christine Oliver, and Andrea Wolf, and of course, led by Dr. Frank and Dr. Lemon. Prevention is hugely important to all of us, and thanks to EIA, Brent Kynock, we have Mark Caitlin, Claire Deacon, Tom Lobenthal, John Newquist, Tony Rich, and Mark Winter that help us with our prevention materials, and we thank them. Earl Daughter, I mean, what do you need to say about Earl? He's just utterly amazing. And you've spent 10 years walking with us with your photographs through your lens and your heart, have captured some of the most amazing posters, Earl, and I'm grateful. We'll have a distribution and a sales opportunity later on today. This year's poster can be seen up here on my left. It's fabulous. It's a melange of all the things. The title is Badges of Pain, Voices for Change. And you'll see that there is an asbestos worker's badge in the middle of the poster, but also I'm wearing one around my neck of somebody who worked at Johns Mansfield. Every voice, every story matters. As you know, we're going to have a new book. Some of you saw it last night, and Emily and Ellen will help with distribution of that, and Chris and I will share more of how it's going to come together with the facts, the stats, and the stories. And it is a somber time when we have to remember huge giants in our world, like David Eagleman, Jim Fight, and Romana in Italy. So we will be honoring our heroes tonight during a candlelight ceremony. And Ellen is so dear, so patient, so smart, so wonderful. She gives up her time. We've already started thinking about what happens in 25. But you give so much to the conference in ADAO, and we're truly grateful for your leadership. And Blue Heron over there trying to work the kinks out of our stuff, and you always come to it, so we thank you for that. So please join me in thanking ADAO leadership, volunteers, sponsors, and all the speakers and honorees for making this conference an early success.
So as our speakers are gathering, I will give you kind of an overview of session one. This is titled 2 Decades of Advocacy, Milestones, Challenges, and the Road Ahead. Marilyn Amento is going to speak to A Widow's Voice, a personal history of mesothelioma and advocacy. Linda will be speaking. Linda Reinstein will be talking about the progress we've made, education, advocacy, and building community in asbestos prevention. Dr. Richard Lemon will speak to the government's role in asbestos regulation and public health. And last, Dr. Arthur Frank will speak to the medical perspective on asbestos exposure and health protection. So if I could ask Marilyn to step up for her presentation.
Thank you, Ellen. My children and I have been a part of ADAO since the very first Asbestos Awareness Conference in 2005. That's me front and center with Julie and Joey in front of me. Linda and Emily are flanking me. Top left is the late, great Alan Reinstein, whose diagnosis and subsequent death from mesothelioma is the driving force behind Linda and ADAO. On the far right there is Barry Castleman, Dr. Richard Lemon, and our late, great co-founder, Doug Larson. Also in attendance that day at our very first conference were people from Libby, Gayla Benefield and Les Scramstead, both of whom lost their lives to mesothelioma. How I got here. This is my husband, Joe. Great man, loving husband and father, and overall family man. He loved being a dad. So Joe was healthy at Christmas in 2022. His first symptom was pain in his side in January of 2003, and he died from mesothelioma 6 months later, having been exposed environmentally to asbestos in Ambler, Pennsylvania, which is about 20 miles from Philly. He was exposed as a preteen. Ambler used to be known as the asbestos capital of the world, and he grew up there. 20 years of turning anger into action. After Joe's death in 2003, and my kids again were 8 and 10 in 2003, after Joe's death, we united as a family and turned our grief and anger into action by educating anyone who would listen. Here are the ADAO Asbestos Conference attendees there in the middle, raising awareness on the mall in DC when we had a poster making event a few years ago here at the conference. I'm proud that my son Joe on the left and my daughter Julie on the right are active participants in educating the world about the dangers of asbestos. Again, they were 10 and 8 when their dad died. As I said, the Amento family faithfully takes opportunity to educate the public about asbestos. In 8th grade there on the left, Joe did his science project on the topic of asbestos, a carcinogen. Joe has also joined me in Alton, Illinois for the Miles for Meso, which is coming up again on Saturday, September 24th, sponsored by Simmons, Hanley, and Conroy. It's a great event worthy of your support. Joe and Julie also advertised door-to-door in Ambler for the ADAO-sponsored Asbestos Be Safe, Be Smart seminar that we presented to the Ambler Borough Council and members of the community. So this is our Ambler community meeting. There you see members of the Ambler Borough Council, Ambler residents in attendance at our community meeting, including Bob Kuzmic on the back left there. He's an ADAO volunteer. That's Julie, Joe, and me on the right there with Dr. Keith Sengel from the University of Pennsylvania, Brent Kynock from the Environmental Information Association, and Linda, and then a member of the Ambler community. I've also had the honor of being invited by Dr. Ted Emmett to present my story, Joe's story, to occupational medicine residents and others at the University of Pennsylvania. Over the years, I've gone on several in-person visits with members of Congress, such as Congressman Steve Cohen, who was a great friend of Warren Zevon. And then we also met with then Majority Leader Harry Reid. He held a face-to-face meeting with us. He was the very first champion of Asbestos Awareness Week. We also had the pleasure of meeting Aaron Brockovich, who was in town for Senator Boxer's press conference. On the far right is a presentation to congressional staffers. Several ADAO volunteers and mesothelioma warriors routinely tell their stories at such events over the years. I've been a conference speaker several times, and I was pleased to tell my story anytime I can. It's painful to relive the story, but if it helps others, I'm game. And we're pleased with our celebrity advocacy. Talented musician Jordan Zevon, who's the son of Warren Zevon, who lost his battle with mesothelioma September 2003 at age 56, 5 weeks after my husband passed. Barbara McQueen also has been an ADAO supporter. She is the widow of actor Steve McQueen, who some may recall sought out controversial laetrile treatments in Mexico before his death from mesothelioma in 1980 at the age of 50. So, let's prevent asbestos exposure, asbestos disease through education. So even though there's grief and pain associated with asbestos disease, we must move forward and seek out opportunities to educate, whether at formal or informal events. Our stories are precious and need to be heard. I'm calling on researchers, public health officials, medical doctors, and the like. Share your invaluable knowledge about asbestos and asbestos disease. Offer to speak at parent-teachers associations, city councils, legislators, your places of worship, school board meetings, and student assemblies. Education is the most powerful weapon which we can use to change the world. So it's up to us to deliver the message. Thank you very much.
So good morning, everybody knows by now, but for anybody watching on YouTube later on, I'm Linda Reinstein, the co-founder of the Asbestos Disease Awareness Organization. I learned the hard way, like a lot of other people, that mesothelioma wasn't just hard to pronounce, but it was an incurable and deadly cancer. I'm not alone, and neither was Emily. We had to start telling our story in a way that people could understand. And how do you talk about a nearly invisible fiber to those inside a medical facility, Washington, D.C., or I suppose inside a courtroom? So we started slow and we grew. And in my opening slide, there's mention of Doug Larkin and others, so we're going to mesh those back together between session 1 and 2. But in a nutshell, ADAO started small. We started with a resolution that was to declare April 1st as Asbestos Awareness Day, thanks to Senator Harry Reid. And 20 years later, I'm proud to share that tonight you'll be able to hear what Senator Merkley put into the congressional record. It's a statement of fact about ADAO 20 years later. And you can see that we do have impact on our making change. So we're all about 19 at this conference due to COVID. So if you think about it, thanks to all of you and our sponsors and our experts and volunteers, we have had 19 congressional staff briefings, and we'll be getting ready after the election, you can bet. We've also had 19 conferences. We've done 19 Senate briefings. We've had awareness resolutions like you've seen with Senator Harry Reid, and of course, 20 conferences, and we're proud to be working up the ladder. So our work starts small and it expands, and we're all about collaboration. We have learned from the very best of the best. Labor unions knew 100 years ago that asbestos was making members sick and also killing them. I have studied, I have learned, I have been mentored by Barry Castleman and Dr. Lemon and all the rest. This is not a new finding. ADAO is a small baby compared to what everyone has done before, but working with trade unions has allowed us to reach a larger voice. This campaign was done with IFF and ADAO in the middle of Times Square. We took our simple message that some people seem to forget, that we need to ban asbestos now. And actually the New York Times covered an article about our campaign. I see Dr. Wolf nodding. It was a big moment in our history. It was just February of this year. It's not just about doing a one-off. It is about building relationships. Relationships that are genuine, deep, and long-lasting. On the left, you see Dr. Raja Flores, Rockstar, Greg Russell, IFF, of course, Alan and I. But more importantly, you see inside the firehouse. And the young members didn't really understand, or maybe they didn't appreciate the dangers of asbestos. So you can bet we continue to work on many different levels. So during the last 20 years, we've also done a lot of academic writing, put things into the docket for various rules of EPA, etc. But we write reports. Reports that get filed, they get used, and they get referenced. But we're really excited. Chris and I are going to be talking about this in session 3. Many of you might have seen this last night, but it's our brand new book about stories. The stories that we started capturing and the stories that we share with the media and Congress and others. And if you can't tell a story that can be seen, heard, felt, shared, and remembered, it's a missed opportunity. So it is our job collectively to do this. So what if we thought about a stadium, Fenway Park, and it was filled with all these fabulously excited fans, and they didn't come home after the game? Well, that's basically what happens every year. A stadium filled with fans, they don't return to their families. It's estimated about 40,000 Americans die every year of asbestos-caused diseases. So it has been glacially slow and painful and frustrating, but exhilarating, exciting, and encouraging. So we go full spectrum. This is just a timeline of how many times we've had the Alan Reinstein Ban Asbestos Act introduced. And you can see it's 9 times over the last 8 years-ish. We're still working for that. We know that in March, which is, you'll hear more from my colleague, Bob Sussman, EPA took a landmark step forward. They banned one fiber, chrysotile, in 6 conditions of use using the AHERA asbestos definition. No other country in the world has a ban on a single fiber in 6 conditions of use. So we have just caused ourselves more confusion. So you can bet that we are looking to, and Bob will tell you more, we had to file, of course, because of industry, and we are looking to hold the line, to defend the science, and improve as we can as a leading stakeholder of asbestos regulations and, of course, using administrative law. So where are we today? I need you guys to know that during the day you're going to hear various different bits of science. Why is it that we're still 100 plus years later trying to ban asbestos? So we're not done. ADAO will continue our dual track strategy to work with the administration, various agencies, and of course Congress to move a comprehensive ban that has legislative clarity, so it doesn't go to the Supreme Court, forward to ban all 6 fibers and the Libby-amphibole in all conditions of use. Our end goal is to eradicate all asbestos-caused diseases, and with your help, I know we can do that. So this presentation on our 20th anniversary is dedicated to Alan, but the hundreds of thousands of Allens. It's real. There are empty chairs and empty moments and blank calendars. So I want you to remember that together we fight on. Thank you.
I'm Richard Lemon. I'm with ADAO and have been for 20 years. But I started my career with the United States Public Health Service as a young epidemiologist assigned to studying asbestos and asbestos-related diseases. I'm going to take you through a little bit of history if you'll bring up the first slide.
In 1971, Dr. Johnson and his associate Richard Lemon went to inspect the Tyler plant with a team of industrial hygiene union officials.
We went directly to the plant and took a tour of the plant. At that point in time, we were very appalled at the condition of the inside of the plant. There was asbestos, raw asbestos, laying on the floors.
Asbestos pipe insulation, there's cutting it, sawing it with saws, breathing dust from it, and causes lung disease.
We attempted to do some ventilation measurements. We found that the ventilation systems were completely clogged at some points with encrusted asbestos, and we took broom handles to knock the asbestos out of the ventilation systems.
The longer I stayed, it was harder for me to breathe, which you get stopped up your nose and all. Every day, you could tell you were taking on lots of stuff.
We were getting no readings on our ventilation instruments, indicating that the plant was very, very poorly ventilated. The employees were not wearing respirators. The employees were eating right in the area of the work site.
Well, that's what one plant looked like when I first started going to asbestos plants throughout the United States. And next we have Dr. Selikoff, who had studied a plant in Patterson, New Jersey, and that plant moved from Patterson, New Jersey to the Tyler, Texas plant that I visited.
1 out of every 5 of these men tends to die of lung cancer. There have been many cancers, about 3 times we expect, of the stomach, colon, rectum. There have been cancers of the abdomen and chest called mesothelioma, and so forth. When the plant moved to Texas, they didn't leave behind the hazard. They took it with them.
Well, this is kind of to start off my talk to give you a little bit of a historic perspective. But by 1976, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health that I worked for had come to the conclusion that there was no safe level for asbestos. So we started and continued making rules and regulations for the workplace. And as you can see, in 1938, the first point, the U.S. Public Health Service came up with a standard to protect workers, not from cancer though. All of these standards down to the lowest standard in 1996 were to protect from asbestos-related lung disease. They would reduce the cancer, hopefully, but they were never meant to cover cancer. That's why in 1976, and ADAO is carried on, we have concluded scientifically that the only way to stop asbestos-related cancers is to ban it. By 1984, we knew that you could not find a safe sampling method that would count the asbestos fibers. So even if we were trying to stop and lower the exposure, we were not counting just asbestos fibers. We were counting dust and all types of fibers. But you want to find out, there are some new papers coming out this year I've seen where some industrial hygienists have tried to conclude that there is a safe level for asbestos. But we have not found that these are some of the low-dose cases, as you can see, dating back to 1964, where even a single day of exposure resulted in mesothelioma and other cancers. How much does it take? Well, in the epidemiological studies, which are not real good indications, but we have seen very low exposures, and these are just some of those studies. What has the asbestos industry left us as we have lowered the exposures? They've left us a lot, as you can see, the legacy asbestos. In buildings throughout the United States, we estimate over 1 million buildings throughout the United States, and these are going to be around for many, many years. So what the asbestos industry is stopping to do, it is going to end in this legacy. We still get asbestos from disasters such as tornadoes, hurricanes, and others. This is just the estimates of disease. I have a mistake on this under the U.S. There are about 8 deaths for mesothelioma each day of the year. So while we're here in the next 2 days, we're going to have 16 deaths from mesothelioma somewhere in the United States. Asbestos is not a disease, not a factor in just one disease, but as you can see, many diseases are related to exposure to asbestos. What do we have to do? We have to continue talking before Congress and other legislative bodies about stopping asbestos. And to end, I'll just show our ADAO flag that we carried in Paris several years ago. This is Linda, myself, and my son. I had to get him acclimatized to walking on some protests, but he did it. So, thank you.
Good morning. I'm Arthur Frank, and I've been asked to speak about prevention. And it's always tough to follow my dear friend Richard. He always gives a great talk, and I've been following him on podiums like this for many years, but I'm going to try to add a new perspective to this topic of prevention. Simply put, and I could just sit down next, is that prevention is done with regard to asbestos by stopping all use. Now, that doesn't mean disease would stop because of the legacy. We'd have a tale of 50, 60 years of disease even if we stopped it tomorrow, which we're not there, and a lot of countries in the world are not. As Richard just showed you, there's a variety of diseases. I'm not going to go through that. And we know that all over the world, prevention really does work. We don't have a lot of examples, a very basic question is, if you stop using a material, does it actually stop disease? Well, we know that for asbestos. Countries like Sweden that stopped using it 30 years ago, the rates of mesothelioma are coming down. We know that because of OSHA regulations and the diminution of exposures at workplaces, it is uncommon these days to see cases of asbestosis. When I started 50 plus years ago, asbestosis was probably the most common disease we saw, more common than the cancers, and now it's fortunately quite uncommon. That said, it takes a lot of asbestos to produce asbestosis, but as Richard showed you, a single day of exposure is sufficient, both in humans and animals, as has been documented, to cause disease. So do we have other examples? Yes, we know that as men in the United States have given up tobacco while women tend to smoke more, rates of lung cancer in men have come down. And once we regulated vinyl chloride, we basically stopped a rare cancer, angiosarcoma of the liver, when that occurred. So the other issue is, how do we get people to understand that there's disease? Well, you have to have data. In the world of public health, we know that the lack of data doesn't mean the lack of disease, and that there are countries that, for many reasons, either refuse to collect data or just have a hard time doing so. Interestingly, the Russians, now the world's major producer of asbestos, who've replaced the Canadians, have stopped recording mesothelioma cases, and yet earlier this year a paper came out, some joint work with IARC, that workers at the at the Russian chrysotile plant or mines actually do get disease. That was sort of a bit of a surprise, though the paper had many, many failings. But the bottom line is, they get disease too. So how do we bring about change? Well, that's what today is a lot about, to hear about bringing about change. It gets done through the law courts. It gets done by putting pressure on industry. It gets done by putting bans, real bans in place, not a single fiber and 6 conditions of use. Prevention comes in a variety of ways. Primary prevention would be stopping use, but secondary and tertiary prevention, which is what we're left with, is, since we don't ban use completely, is doing things like putting workers in respirators, which is a terrible way to have to work. But then we're also left with giving people vaccinations, because when they do develop disease, they suffer more, so we have to give them their flu and their COVID shots and so forth. We also bring about change by shining a light on disease. I have a colleague working with me as a postdoc in India right now, a country that has been abysmal in recording its mesothelioma cases, though by law they're supposed to. For years they didn't record literally a single case. They're probably still officially recording cases in the single digits in a country of 1.3 billion people. My postdoc went and looked at mesothelioma records from public hospitals, which only represent 1/5 of the hospitals of India. He only got responses from about half of those, so it was about 45 or 50 hospitals, some of which claimed they didn't have disease, where we know that they actually did. But what he found in a 10-year period from the hospitals that answered, which was a very small percentage of all Indian hospitals, he found over 2,200 cases of mesothelioma, which has now been published. But again, the government still has recorded cases in the single digits. The other aspect of prevention is to educate workers, because of the legacy materials, the millions of buildings, million buildings that have asbestos, and many other places that asbestos exists. You have to still educate workers about the hazards of asbestos and not let them be exposed. Even if we stop using new material, there's so much in place in buildings alone in this country, 25 million tons. There also are some new issues about asbestos that we hadn't thought of very much before. The whole issue of ingestion, as you heard Dr. Solikoff back in the Patterson plant days, found excess gastrointestinal tract cancers. He also found excess kidney cancers. So ingestion is a route of exposure that we haven't thought about. So what we need to do is get back to prevention. We need to support RBAN, and we need to remember that, as somebody once put it, if somebody takes out a gun and shoots you, that's called murder, but if you work with asbestos and you die, that's the cost of doing business. We can't let that happen anymore. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for our speakers?
Yeah, Stephen Markowitz. So, Dick, you showed in the 70s the decline in allowable levels of asbestos, regulated levels, but we know that asbestos, new use of asbestos declined markedly during the 70s. So that by the early 80s, it was much, much less. To what extent did regulation versus litigation produce that decline?
I believe they both had a role, but I think as far as reducing the decline in use of asbestos, that litigation probably played a bigger role than that of the regulations going into effect, because the fines for breaking the regulation or not following it were very small. They were not real expensive. So, as Arthur just said, it's a cost of doing business. But I think as we started getting multiple litigation going from firms like are represented here, this played a major role, and I believe a significant role compared to legislation. That's my opinion.
Stephen, the Clarence Burrell case, when we go to Washington, is really significant to take the data from 1973 and look at all this failure to warn and liability and responsibility. And that really, the industry felt the pain. And we're using Clarence Burrell's playbook now in Congress to put pressure on companies. And I think we're seeing success, although slow, greatly diminished.
Any other questions? Okay, I think we're ready to move on to session 2.